I think that it would be really cool to talk about my story as a Dominican. I'm from the Dominican Republic. I came here as an immigrant. And for financial independence, we do things differently. And that's something that I've never talked about on any other podcast, but I feel like this is the best opportunity to do it because there are tons of Latinos that retire early. They just don't do it the conventional way that we're used to, which is kind of like investing more than 50% of your income into the stock market and then reaping those benefits. So we could kind of incorporate a little bit of that story within this podcast if you'd like.
You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
All right, everyone, you guys got that kind of teaser reel. We have a lot to cover, but from shopaholic to investing Latina, we're getting this opportunity to speak with Jully-Alma Tavares. With this episode, we're going to get to kind of go through this internal inflection point that you go through. You arrive in the United States as an immigrant. In your mind and in your family's mind, you don't budget because budgeting is what people do. That's for people that have money. They have something left over. That's for those people. You don't budget. You don't talk about money. It's not something you're doing strategically. You're just trying to figure out this new place, this new environment, these new rules. And you want a better life for your kids, but there's not like a money strategy there because there's so much other stuff you're trying to figure out that you don't have the bandwidth to pass the money lessons down at that point. And so what we see with Jully's story is she has, at this point in her life, she has become this advocate for Latinas across the country, helping them do better with money. But she's able to draw on her own experience, not only as an immigrant, but as an immigrant who got caught up in consumer culture to the degree of 5 figures of consumer debt, dug her way out, and is now on the path to financial independence. It's going to be a phenomenal story. I can't wait to get into it. And to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I am doing quite well. Yeah, Jully's story has a little bit of everything, right? She comes from an immigrant family that didn't talk about money, but yet she started investing at 19 with free money in her 403b, which I think is just so cool. But then keeping up with the Joneses hit. And keeping up with the Joneses at work, which I'm just fascinated to ask her about. She was in the fashion industry, and it turned into 5 figures of credit card debt that she was actually able to dig her way out of. And she has a FI number within 10 years. I mean, this is the full story, and it's going to be fantastic for the audience. So with that, Jully, welcome to Choose FI.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with y'all. This is going to be fun. I'm excited to talk about all of my money mistakes and the lessons that I learned from my parents and also didn't learn from my parents. So let's get into it.
Okay, well, let's start there. We had this awesome kind of teaser reel at the beginning, and we're talking about Dominicans don't do FI the same way. Can you add some context to that statement? It's pretty epic.
Yeah, for sure. I am from the Dominican Republic, and I came to New York when I was 4 years old with my parents. We slowly kind of immigrated here. My mom is one of 11 kids, and little by little they started coming to New York and establishing roots in this country. And even throughout all of that, my family continued to invest back home. And I think this is something that a lot of people don't necessarily talk about. It's not like a huge thing, especially within the FI community, where it's like, oh, you can, these are other ways, like alternative ways to do it. And for immigrants, I think in general, not just me being from the Dominican Republic, but for a lot of immigrants, we are constantly sending money back home. Either we have our grandmothers back home or our cousins, so there's still this huge kind of ecosystem that goes on, this socioeconomic system back home that we really want to also continue to support. And I think that when it comes to financial independence, it really becomes an opportunity for people that do come to the US to work hard in any sort of career that they choose to do, still invest back home, buy properties back home, and then eventually retire early.
Yeah, Jully, that's so interesting. So when you said that invested back home, my question that immediately popped to my head was, is that for ultimate wealth or support for members of the family that are still back home, or is it both? Like, talk me through how that works.
Sure, it definitely is a mix of both. Because, for example, when we came and my father still had his mother back in the Dominican Republic, it was really about building her a new home back home and making sure that she was set. And then a couple years later, she came to the US. So that home now is rented out, and people live there. And it became sort of the beginning of the real estate portfolio if you will, back home. And it was in a way to really help the other members in our community back home while also establishing this sort of cash flow business.
Interesting. So is real estate in the Dominican Republic in your future? Like, is that part of your ultimate plan?
Absolutely. Like, I love the Dominican Republic, and we do have properties back home. And it's something that for immigrants, I think, and for a lot of Latinos, I speak to the Latin community through Investing Latina. And I talk about kind of our struggles and the nuances and the things that we go through that, a typical American that has been here for a couple of generations hasn't gone through or doesn't go through. And being able to connect with our communities back home and being able to let people know that this is actually what we have done. We invest more into real estate than we do into the stock market. So it's actually one of the biggest reasons why I started Investing Latina, because for me, it's also important to know that, or to share rather, that we should be diversified. We can't have it all in one basket. It can't all be in real estate properties, but it should also be in the market. And that's something that we lack. So my parents, when I was 19 years old and I started working for a nonprofit organization, my mom said to me, "What are you doing putting money into this 403B situation? What is that?" And I'm like, honestly, I don't really know what it is. But what I do know is that I'm getting free money. So I like the sound of that, and I'm going to continue to do that. And of course, what are we, 11, 12 years later? I have a huge portfolio that started just because of that one decision. I didn't listen to my mom's advice because she said, "Don't do that, save. Like, why put your money into there? Retirement is so far away. Besides, we get Social Security benefits in this country. Why think about that?" And yeah, I didn't take that advice.
Yeah, money lessons from our parents, but we're hoping they're good ones, right? I mean, thanks, Mom. You had a lot of other things figured out, so we're not writing it all off. But I'm glad we didn't take your advice on this particular aspect. So we framed a little bit about this immigrant story and maybe money lessons, kind of this alternate approach, this alternate idea of what financial independence actually looks like. We've kind of identified the fact that in many, and in particular, immigrant cultures, there's an expectation, a strong expectation that part of what the parents are investing in is their kids, and that at
Yes.
some point those kids are then going to be that the kids are going to be the version of Phi, right? Like we have one of 11, hopefully 6 or 7 of those 11 are going to be able to take care of us when we get to the point where we need it. And maybe that's kind of a large part of that has probably transferred even to your generation and beyond, where there's an expectation that you will, for perpetuity, be sending some amount of money home to some varying degree. So that kind of changes your plans as well. What other kind of money lessons or money expectations did you get from your parents? We talked just briefly about budgeting. You said that budgeting wasn't really a concept that was introduced. I'd love to have you explore that a little bit further.
Yeah, so when we first came here, it was really just about surviving. And my parents really just had to figure things out. We did not know the language. I remember starting kindergarten, and Spanish is my first language. And I still remember that day. It's like such a vivid memory to walk into a room and not understand a single word of what anybody was saying. And you don't forget those kind of things. It's very impactful, but it also was kind of like a lesson in being able to just figure stuff out. So for us, we didn't talk about money. We didn't budget. We just had to, in the moment, figure life out. Week to week, my dad started driving a taxi and really was just paying the rent based off of what that weekly income was. And then it wasn't until, a couple of years later that he really started thinking in an entrepreneurial type of way where he's like, I'm working for myself right now. I need to do something different and in a bigger scale. And then that's when he started building his own business, which became the bodega business, such a New York classic. For all of my New Yorkers that are listening, the importance of a community bodega. And it really impacted me because I grew up in that environment and I got to see my parents, both of them, work in the bodega and really contribute to the community and also build their own life and their own business. And they were able to, again, contribute back home to help other family members. So money lessons that I definitely have always received from my parents was be generous and give. And I think that that's something that no matter what stage of your life you're in, when you do that, you get fulfillment that you really cannot get from money. When you can help someone, even something as simple as some money advice, some tips to help them in their family lifestyle, whatever it can be, when you can help people. And if you do have the means to help someone financially, it feels so good to do that. So I love that money advice that I received from my parents.
Yeah, that's incredible. And you said when you first came here, it was about surviving, right? And then
Yeah.
you're talking ultimately about resilience, right? That first day, and it's ultimately about resilience and doing hard things. Think about that first day that you walked into kindergarten and having to overcome that and realizing you can do hard things. Your dad coming here and like you said, he's driving, he's trying to pay the bills, and then he shifts into entrepreneurship. And that must have been remarkable to watch his transition, right? Like, what did you think about it when he first started this entrepreneurial journey? Like, did he talk to you about it? Was it just kind of watching him as he went on his journey, or were there like overt lessons?
That is such a great question because I'm talking about it now. Like it's all pink roses and it's all beautiful. But the reality was that we didn't see my dad very often. My dad worked long hours. He worked a lot to build this life of, what became financial independence for him, relatively earlier than a lot of people, but it comes at a price, and he had to work these long hours because that's the way that he knew how to make more money. Had we known or had my father perhaps been investing into the stock market, had that been something that our community had spoken of, maybe life would have been a little bit different. Maybe we would have been able to see him more and spend more time together and go on more family vacations. But it was something that I know now because we always constantly knew my dad was working. And then even within our family, like my cousins, oh, where's your dad? Oh, he has to work. So that was something that it's kind of the other side of the coin, right? There are a lot of things that come from that sort of sacrifice, but it does cost. It comes at a price.
It's interesting though that you can build on the knowledge base of your parents, right? You're starting from this foundation. I mean, your parents are passing down work ethic, so they'll get in, they'll lean in. Entrepreneurship, like fine, if the opportunity isn't being, offered to us, we'll just create it. We'll start our own business. And yes, if it means we have to bootstrap it and lean in, we'll have to do that. But you're picking up on that and you're saying, all right, well, now with the benefit and really starting with the lessons that they gave me, how can we optimize that anymore? And you're saying, okay, it's hard work, it's entrepreneurship, plus optimization, plus understanding the rules, plus knowing how can we take this money and instead of always having our time tied to our money, how can we create a scenario where our money is actually earning money for us? And that's kind of that next layer. And that's kind of what you're putting back into your community is like, there are some very viable pathways that, we can get better together. I think that's what stands out, but we're going to get there and we're going to talk about that. Your path is not just this optimized path and you're just talking down from how you've done everything right. I mean, somewhere along the way, despite maybe a few moves you made correct, you ended up with a significant amount of consumer credit card debt. And it sounds to me that in some degree it's tied to your career choice earlier on in your trajectory. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yes, absolutely. So I, mentioned that I started investing when I was 19. I was working for this nonprofit and I was doing that while I was going to school. And I studied fashion merchandising and economics. And that kind of combination is pretty unique. Not many people choose to go through this fashion and high glamour career path and also study economics. But that was what I wanted. And that's kind of what I chose because I had this little birdie in the back of my mind or on my shoulder of my dad saying, why don't you just grow up to be an accountant? And I'm like, yeah, no, that's not going to work for me.
You come work in the bodega. We got room.
Yeah, that was his dream probably, right? So he kind of instilled that in me, but I also had so much inspiration from my mother. And my mother is like a beautiful, glamorous woman that has always, no matter with what little she had, if she had just one dress, she would kind of turn it into 5 different looks. And I was also very inspired by that. So it kind of like sculpted my career and what I chose to do. So when I went into school and then I got my first job, like graduating from school, got my first job. Whoa, lifestyle inflation. Like, hello. I was like, what? I'm making all this money. Now it's time to shop for real, for real. And I really started doing that really with the idea that the industry itself imposed upon us. It's like, you got to look good. You have to have the latest shoes, the Louboutins, the Gucci shoes, the purses, the Chanel bags, all these things. Like they signified success in the career. And because I was truly experiencing success and working with these amazing companies, I worked for like Mr. Ralph Lauren himself. It was great. I loved everything that I was doing. And I wanted to prove that, I guess. So that's where the shopping came in. And what happened with that is when you're buying things that are luxury priced, that are very expensive, and that are so fancy, it adds up really, really quickly. So it took 3 Chanel bags, which by the way, I still own. I consider them sort of an investment, but that's a whole nother podcast episode. Like what
Is
others.
that an alternative investment episode?
Right, it is. It is. So these 3 bags, all of a sudden, I had all this debt. And what I recognized about myself, a little bit in hindsight and a little bit in the moment, kind of like a mix of both, was that I was really channeling emotions in my shopping. And when I felt good about something, I would shop and celebrate. When I felt bad about something, I used it as a way to pick me up. And it became unhealthy. And I, all of a sudden, even with all the amazing examples that I have in my family of people that have businesses and my aunts and uncles that have started things and flourished within what they've done, I all of a sudden had no control over my money. And I continued to invest during that time, which is probably the best thing that I could have done. And I'm still like grateful that I decided to do that. But I really got held down by all of that debt. And it wasn't until we were faced with my father's sickness that I had to kind of open my eyes a little bit more and recognize that, hey, listen, you've always had support. You've always had a safety net. My parents have always been here. They worked from the ground up to build what they have, but that's not always going to be the case. And that was really where the mind shift began because it wasn't immediate, but it began at that point, and that was in 2013. And then in 2016, I became debt free. And after that debt freedom, all hell broke loose because I was like, I want to celebrate. I celebrated by spending, but then I said, okay, I have one opportunity to celebrate, and now back to business. And I continued to invest, and I upped my investments, and I at some point was contributing, I think maybe I want to say like 20% of my income when I into my 401k. So I really put the car in high gear, I would say.
Julie, I want to certainly hear all about that journey to paying off debt and that up and down, right? Like that's what's so interesting. But if you don't mind, I wanted to ask a question about kind of this industry imposed keeping up with the Joneses, right? Because that's what it seems like. You were trying to prove that you were successful, or it's just, oh, it's known that if you're in the fashion industry, you need to have these type of shoes and this bag, et cetera. And like, I've seen that with other industries, like real estate agents. Even if they're not making a lot of money, they're driving a Mercedes or a BMW because that's what they roll up to the house in, right? Or financial advisors, right? Like no financial advisor is going to come to your house in a 2003 Civic like I have, like they're going to be trying to prove their success. And I guess my real question is, knowing what you know now, is there something else that you could have done when you first got that fashion job? Like what would Julie from 2020 tell Julie back then, 10 years ago, like to maybe mentally overcome that kind of imposed thing? Or just like, are there hacks that you would have worked around to look high fashion on a budget? Talk me through that if you've ever thought of that before.
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like what's difficult, I think, when you go from, not making money to suddenly having this consistent paycheck is that you feel like nothing could go wrong. And I would suggest that as a tip to myself 10 years ago. Like, listen, yeah, this is great. Money is coming in, there's cash flow, but life isn't perfect and things go wrong all the time. So I think having that sort of mentality and hopefully it's not to make it a pessimistic type of way of thinking in life, but actually trying to keep that in mind and being able to recognize that you first have to really set up your financial house. You first have to be able to have a place where you feel comfortable. If something were to happen, you can still be okay. And I think that when millennials, let's say, or even Gen Z, as they're coming into the workforce, they might think that everything is great and that you'll figure stuff out. But it's important for people to know that in order for you to really figure life out, you have to start with the basics. You have to start with your survival. And having that foundation of an emergency fund is what survival is all about.
I mean, you set it up perfectly. We were going there directly, but thank you for that because, I mean, what you just said is 5 figures of credit card debt. Keep in mind that when you're not paying off your balance each and every month on time and in full, you are now subject to interest rates of 12 to 30+%. It would not be hyperbole to say you were probably paying 20+% interest on this 5 figures of debt, of consumer debt with 20+% interest rates attached to that. That is compound interest working against you, right?
Right.
And it's hard to dig your way out of that, especially if you're in an industry where success looks like spending more and you're trying to keep up with the Joneses. But somehow, with all of that, you basically said you were able to pay off those 5 figures of credit card debt between the years of 2013 and 2016. So in maybe just over 3 years, you had paid off a tremendous amount. And it strikes me, for you to be able to accomplish that, you are probably putting well past 50% of your income towards paying off those credit card balances. And to do that, it sounds to me like one of the keys to your success was knowing your survival number. So I'd love for you to connect those threads. How was this possible? And what's the action items for individuals that are in a hole? They're in a very deep hole, and hope is a long way away.
Yeah, absolutely. That survival number is actually something that I practice to this day. It's really about having 8 categories. So I'm actually a minimalist. Like, listen, I want my finances to be as minimal as possible. I don't want to sit here and budget for 3 hours or stuff cash envelopes. Like, I can't do that. My brain doesn't work that way. I need things to be very streamlined and very simple. So I created this sort of survival number chart that you can access right on my website, investinglatina.com. So it's 8 categories of the things that you need. And what I want to mention, of course, you're going to hear like, your basics are your rent and your food. But I want to also mention that in there is entertainment. You have to be able to find respite in your day to day. You have to be able to take breaks. You have to recognize that that's part of your survival. You can't survive if you're not taking breaks, if you're not, listening to music or going out for one meal, once in a while. These are things that are important to us as humans. And the survival number includes that. So it's the very last category, it's entertainment, and there's only 8. So you just have to fit things into those 8 categories. You'll get your number. And for me, it's 581. You can check out the article.
$581 is your survival number with all of those categories included?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to need a
Great.
breakdown. We need some proof here. We're going to need a breakdown of this. So what are the 8 categories one more time? And then how does that map out to $581 a month?
Yes. Hold on. Let me pull them up. So the 8 categories are groceries, which I have at $190. I have rent and utilities at $86. And I have transportation at $127. Dining out, $45 per month. Household items, $15. Clothing, $60, which was the hardest one for me, but now it's so second nature. And then health, $48. Oh, and the last one, of course, entertainment, which I have $9.99 as my Spotify account. These are the absolute things that I need in order to keep my life sane, my mind intact, and be able to give the world what I can.
All right, I guess we'll go ahead and talk about the next. No, I'm just kidding. Wait, what? Rent?
Yeah.
Did I hear you say rent and utilities was $86 a month? Was that that was a typo, right?
It's not a typo. It's true. It's true. I've been master leasing my apartment, which is a 4-bedroom apartment, and I rent out the room. So I have this community of what we can kind of consider roommates, but it doesn't work that way simply because it's more short term. So they're there, for a certain amount of time for whatever, needs or transition that they may be going through. And I still am the owner and responsible for that master lease.
Okay. We're going to dive into this more. So these are not roommates in the traditional sense that they're friends of yours, right? Like it sounds
Right.
like these are much shorter terms. So I guess first, master lease. That's a term that I don't know that we've mentioned more than maybe once or twice on the podcast, if at most. So tell us what that means. Is that something that only certain jurisdictions allow? Like, is that something available everywhere? Do you talk to the owner of the property? Talk us through that first.
Yeah. So when it comes to master leasing, you are the one that's responsible for the main lease. And every single month when the rent is due, it's under your name. It's what you have to do. But then there's sub leases within that contract. When someone new comes in, how long they're going to be there and what their responsibility is. So it is, I am not sure if you can do this everywhere. You definitely have to check within not only your state regulations, but also it really goes down to the landlord that you have, what kind of things you can do to make it work. And I've been living there a very long time and I've been able to do that and it works. And it's been almost 2 years since I've been doing it. And it allows me to definitely save a lot of money and keep my survival number low.
That's interesting, right? Because what you're describing, this is not a house hack in the traditional sense where we buy a property, we own it, we rent out other units. This is rather, let's go find some place that we want to rent. And then either at the front end, right when we're getting in there ourselves, or due to the nature of the fact that now the landlord trusts us because we're renewing our rent and they love having us, they would do anything to keep us. We're saying we would like to be able to sublease out some of these rooms. And then again, this is all above board. So it's allowable by the state and by the county, but it's also allowed by the landlord. This is not some off the books quiet thing where you have extra people that no one knows about. This is a above board thing that there's documentation and paperwork for it. That's kind of my understanding right now. But the larger effect is once you go through this process, you've created a house hack where I think in your
Yeah.
case, your rent, what is your actual rent that you're responsible for each month? Not you personally, but for the unit.
About 2,400.
Okay. And your roommates or your cohabitants, of which there are 3 units inside this. How many
Yes.
people cohabit?
So yeah, it's three, and sometimes it does vary. I have like empty rooms at certain times. Like right now, I actually do, but typically the averages out to about making the 23 off of it, and only having to pay the rest.
Okay, so you would have some fluctuation between maybe as much as $400 or $500 a month in rent, all the way down to maybe zero, maybe even a little bit of profit, depending on whether or not you're at full occupancy or not. When you're not
Yeah.
at full occupancy, how are you marketing this, and what are your requirements for who is allowed to move in? Do you ever have other families moving in? Is it other single individuals? Do you market on Craigslist or Facebook? How hard is it for you to find occupancy when someone moves on to this next chapter if it's a short-term deal?
It's not very hard. I mean, I live in Yonkers, New York, and New York in itself is a very high cost of living type of city. And I think that, people are always looking for these opportunities. If you go right on Craigslist, you see tons of these opportunities, and people actually looking will post on there as well. So for me, when I'm looking for people, I will market it on Craigslist. And it's very important for you to find people that have similar lifestyles. So I think that's a really important part in terms of being able to cohabit with others, similar working schedules and similar lifestyles, the way that, we spend our free time. So that allows me to really kind of create a good cohabiting space for everyone. So you got to think of a lot of different scenarios and really question, like, what is it that you do on weekends? And if they're like, yeah, I love to party, I'm like, that might not work because, we're all pretty quiet people. We have things that we do. And for the most part, everyone's very chill. So that's the type of lifestyle that we want to create.
Yeah, I love this. So you live in a large 4-bedroom apartment just outside of New York City, like ultra high cost of living area, and you're paying $86, including utilities. So I mean,
Yeah.
that obviously, bravo, that's amazing. But so that's clearly the neon lights number. The $86 or the 581 is your survival number. But for people listening to this podcast who maybe they're not going to do this, right? Like, but they still want to calculate their survival number. Like that is a very important exercise. So regardless of whether your rent and utilities are $86 or it's $1,000 or $2,000 for your rent and or mortgage, right? Like the calculation is still important. So this is cool just for most people to have an understanding of, hey, if everything else broke down, like this is my survival number.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see it definitely on that sheet. And I think that my situation is obviously, unique in its way. But if you are somebody that is interested in house hacking, this can totally work for you. You can really go into, especially now as mortgage rates are at an all-time low, you can probably find a property and practice the same idea. And the more you save at the end of the day, the more you can invest and the closer you are to your financial independence number.
It seems to me that one of the reasons that we're having this conversation today and that you're reaching tens of thousands of people through your platform is because you started with this big idea. What would it look like for me to crush my expenses such that I could have the life I want to live as a fashionista living close to New York? And, this is what I want, but I've got tens of thousands of consumer debt hanging over my head. I can't keep doing the same thing. What would it look like for me to have very close to what I have now, but for a fraction of the cost? And you figured out how to do it for $581 a month. You're making a great income. You're crushing the job. You're probably getting raises each and every year. It looks like you're on a trajectory to be able to save 80+% of your income, and you just send every penny you have and you knock out this incredible credit card debt just over a period of years. But I'm curious. So now you have this, look what I have done. And I think there's something here. I want to share it with other people. I'm just curious, what happened like next? You have this platform, you're sharing this idea with your community, you're still working in the fashion world. Like, give us a sense for where's the intersection of minimalism, the need to have an update wardrobe, your desires to be an investor? Like, where do you go after 2016?
Yeah, I think that at that moment, what's really great? After I paid off my debt, I got this sense of freedom where I'm like, wow, I can do anything. I no longer have this debt. I no longer have this interest rate that's killing me. I'm free. I can do everything that I want with my money, whether that is spending it on clothes and shoes, or I can invest my money and really build wealth. And I think that that's where my mind was. Shortly after becoming debt free, I quit my corporate job. So I quit my corporate job because of that freedom that I felt. And I said, I'm going to work for myself. I'm going to consult within the industry. And I'll use everything that I've learned in the last 15 years of working in the industry to really help other brands grow. And that's what I did. And I've been doing that for 3 years. So I'm no longer tied to the corporate world, but I am still using all of the things that I learned within the corporate world to really kind of build up my business. And aside from that, which now like seems to actually be decreasing in terms of the dedication and time that I give it, because I have the Investing Latina platform. And I am so inspired and motivated by the community to really continue to give people these resources and these stories to be able to inspire them to do more and to also reach financial stability and then ultimately financial independence.
Yeah, I absolutely love, the freedom that having this $581 a month, right? Like that's sub $7,000 a year in expenses. That gives you the freedom to go out on your own, right? And to explore this. That is absolutely brilliant. And I'm curious, I wanted to kind of go back. You talked at the very beginning about some of the things that people who are maybe first generation to this country go through that people who have been here, I think you said for generations, don't think about. And I'm curious, like the intersection of that with the messages that you give on your platform. Like, talk us through like what nuances and differences there would be that you talk about as compared to traditional personal finance.
Yeah. You know what I think is actually that kind of brings this all together, that when we came to this country, we had no choice but to live together. The whole family. Like, I think there were like 12 of us in a 2-bedroom apartment. And we had to make that work because nobody had history. Nobody had previous apartments that they've rented. Nobody had credit. These were things that we had to do because we had no option. We had no choice. We didn't have a previous generation that had opened up a credit card for us so that we can build credit in that way. So it really is, for me, very important to speak about these things and speak about what we have to do to build credit and to establish ourselves and to really settle and build roots here, especially because I know people that literally have moved from the Dominican Republic, where I'm from, literally like 2 weeks ago. Like I got a DM from somebody that said, I've actually been following you because my cousin is from New York and I just moved to New York also. And I want to learn from you and I want to figure out how things work. And of course, this conversation was in Spanish. And that's what I want to do. Those are the people that I want to help.
Okay, this is amazing. What do you tell that person? Like, what does that conversation actually look like? I think this is what, I've never experienced that conversation. That is not my lived experience. Like, what do you tell that person? How do they get on their feet in a new country when, they're here, obviously, to work hard and all these things, but like, what do they do on day one?
Yeah. So they mentioned that they saw my page because someone shared it. Their cousin who's from here shared my page with them and thought it would be useful because I talk about these things. Like my three pillars are talking about building credit, investing in the stock market, and investing into real estate because that's like my huge like interest. So that's how she found my page. And my advice to her was, girl, you better start saving and you better start investing as soon as you can, you know? So there is this sort of like immigration process that we have to go through. And that's stuff that for everyone is a little bit different and it's unique depending on how they come to this country, what sort of resident status they have. So there's a little bit of that conversation going on. And then there's also the financial conversation. As soon as you're here, you go out and open up a debit account. That's the beginning. That's the very beginning of what you have to do in order to build relationships with banks that ultimately will give you a mortgage. You know, they will allow you to buy a property and eventually build wealth. So that's kind of how it starts. And I'm really excited for them. Like, I'm excited to kind of help out in any way that I can so that they can really accomplish what they came here to accomplish, which at the end of the day is we want to be happy. We want to make money and we want to spend time with our loved ones. That's what life is about.
That is amazing. And it sounds like you're really trying to just normalize this, right? Like you mentioned back when you were younger and you were just starting to invest, there was this lack of trust in the market, right? And there was obviously there was familiarity with real estate, but there wasn't that familiarity with investing in the market. And it sounds like you're trying to say, hey, this is something really important to build generational wealth, that we have to talk about this, right? Like we have to get over the stigma of talking about it or just not knowing, frankly. Many of us, we don't know, but you know
Right.
now and you can spread this.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, like, do you talk to your family about money? You personally?
I love that. I, for a long time, did not. Even when I was going through my debt freedom journey, like paying off all of the debt that I had, no, it definitely was not conversations that are still not very normalized within our families and our communities. But what's funny now is that I have tons of little cousins that are on YouTube and on Instagram, and they're, you know, between ages of like 8 and 16. Like we just did a quinceañera for my little cousin this weekend, and they've been watching my videos and they find it so funny that I am like creating YouTube videos and it's all about money. And I love that. I think that there is opportunity for us to have more of these conversations. And a lot of the things that we do, they speak for themselves. You know, if you're an example of something within your family, even if you don't talk about it, people notice it. You know what I mean? If you're going out, you're shopping all the time, they notice it. If you are saving money or just, you know, being financially wise, they also notice those things. So even though in our community it's not very normal, I hope that we can get rid of those stigmas and normalize it a little bit more. But it's also kind of important to know that the things that we do, they are an influence to the people around us. So I know that there are probably people that are listening that might think, you know, this is a scary conversation to have. I don't know how to start it. I don't know what to do. But in small steps, you can do it. You know, just slightly mention something like, oh, I'm not going to do this actually because I want to save a little bit of money. Even that will spark something in someone else within your family to think, oh, why are they thinking about saving money? Like, what are you saving money for? And even that starts a small conversation. So I think that it's a huge topic, money and family, but that's kind of like a little way to get started.
Can I ask you just one more kind of fun question here? Just because I want to make sure that we're getting the truth, you know? And what what I mean by that is, you know, you're a former fashionista. Like you went to school for this. This was your passion. You got a job doing this. This was your identity. You have 5 figures of credit card debt to prove it. And now you're telling me that your survival budget, but honestly, it sounds like your survival budget is more like a steady state budget. You know, you have what you need on a month to month basis. Your steady state budget is $581 a month. Like that doesn't even get half of one of your Louis Vuitton bags, you know,
No,
much
not
less a new
even.
outfit each week for a fashionista. Like, what does your wardrobe consist of now? And are you happy? Like, do you feel deprived? That's really the ultimate. What is your wardrobe? And
Oh,
if you're being honest, do you feel deprived?
yeah, I love that. I think that it's like, so when I started transitioning, when my mind really started to shift It was actually during the time of Marie Kondo, and everybody was going crazy over minimalism, like, oh, simplify things, get rid of anything that doesn't bring you joy. And that was really where I started to it was the beginning of the capsule wardrobe where I'm like, I went through my closet and I had this picture of, it was in my living room, actually, in my parents' living room. I had all my clothes laid out. And it was insane how many pairs of shoes I had, how much clothes I had.
Can you get me a copy of that picture?
I can get it for you. And I looked at it and I'm like, this is so unnecessary. Why? I had things that I had never worn that still had tags. That was, how I really started to recognize this was a shopping addiction, because it wasn't even about buying something that I was going to wear that I needed for an occasion. It was just, I needed to spend. That was it. So I got rid of things that I thought I wouldn't need. I got rid of a lot of weird fashion colors that I'm like, this doesn't even look good on me. So I think that that's the key with the capsule wardrobe. Focus on the things that look good on you, the colors that complement your skin tone, and keep it simple. And for me now, I don't feel deprived because everything that I do have fits me amazingly. It complements me and I feel really comfortable in it. And I think that in the fashion industry, we make a lot of sacrifices on comfort just for the look, which is why there are 6-inch stilettos out there and they definitely get bought.
They have Dr. Scholl's memory foam for the lining, though, I think.
See, now that's true luxury right there. So I think that shopping a lot, you're depriving yourself of comfort. You're just doing things for the look of it and the fun, and you're depriving yourself of the peace of mind that having less brings.
And the intersection of financial security, obviously, right? Like you wouldn't have had 5 figures plus of credit card debt if you weren't trying to keep up with the fashion. So it's interesting, right? When you see it on this other side, that it's win-win-win. Like you've developed a completely different mindset to this.
Yeah, I did. And I'm so happy. I feel like I mentioned, when I paid off my debt, I felt free. Like life just opened up for me. And I'm like, ooh, what can I put my money towards that's going to make me more money, instead of, oh, what am I going to shop this week so that I look good the following week?
Yeah. And as I listen to this, I think like what I hear you saying, I don't hear you tell anybody that the goal here is to get your life down to $581 a month. I hope nobody comes away with that being as the takeaway. But I think what we've seen, especially in your case, Julie, is that it's a focus on what it is that you value. And this older version of yourself, this pre-inflection point, that person wasn't happy unless they were spending $12,000 a month, and they were maybe only making 6, 7, or 8. So it left them in a pretty big hole pretty fast. This new version of yourself is like optimized around value. Your life happens to only cost around $600 a month. If you spend twice that because you know what, I want something, great, but your happiness is no longer tied to how much you spend each month. It's based on, well, what actually makes me happy? And you've given yourself the bandwidth and space. And now you're inspiring a whole nother generation in the case of your nieces and nephews and their friends and family and all the other people that will hear this episode and share it with someone that they know can benefit. That's how it starts. That's how the conversation starts. That's how we remove this taboo around money and actually start fostering conversations that leads to better lives for all of us and for our communities that we're speaking to. So I guess with that in mind, I'm very excited. I'm so excited that you joined us in the show. If someone listened to this and they want to go a little bit farther, they want to connect with you and your content, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yes, you can visit me right on investinglatina.com, where you can find some of these articles that I've written for Time Magazine and for Huffington Post. And you can also follow me on Instagram as Investing Latina. I also have my YouTube channel where you can actually watch my video on 25 things that I no longer buy. And it really is about the transition of going from a shopaholic to then being a minimalist.
Awesome. Julie, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. That was awesome. So much fun.
All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to Choose FI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.